Welcome, everybody, to episode number 2
Dos.
of the IDK WTF podcast. I don't know what the fuck I'm doing.
Nope.
We are your hosts, David B.
Anastasia Button. And today we are talking a little bit more on the health side of things as we cover 3 topics: business, health, and relationships, but how it all kind of comes down to the entrepreneur. And today we want to talk a little bit on the health side in the mind and sometimes the body with trauma.
Ooh,
and how trauma can be affecting, yes, the mental health crap we all try to avoid and not really dive into, or at least this person tries to avoid as much as possible. And we're really going to talk about how it can get you into not only trouble, but it can stop you or it can help you. And so we really live the philosophy of we don't know what the fuck we're talking about, which is very true. But we can tell you some stories, personal stories, and other stories that may help you along your journey to really identify some of your trauma blockers and things that are really becoming hurdles in your journey as business owners and how you can probably overcome them. Yeah, right?
Totally. And the other thing I really think is nice and timely, which I really like, is that the topic of mental health is actually getting a lot more socially acceptable to discuss. There's still a lot of weird stigmas around it that don't really need to be there. And I think it's just, especially this 2020 has really brought to light a lot of things that have been undiscussed before. So
yeah, I mean, what else are you going to do? You're sitting in your 10 by 10 room and you got nothing but to sit with yourself. So you can either really get to know yourself or not, it can go either way. But I think a lot of us have had some sort of self-awakening in 2020 that can really bring, hopefully 2021 to a better and more of a year of growth, right? Yeah. And really putting growth, I guess you could say actually putting growth into action, because the growth happened in 2020. So now it's time to really put it into action in 2021.
Yeah, the awareness is what happened in 2020. We're all
word.
Yeah, so I heard a lot of, I forget exactly how they said it, but it was like some people either found out they really, really love their life or they hate their life.
Right? Or they just found out that the most boring person in the world because nothing has changed. That was me.
Which is me too. Honestly. It was like
oh. Yeah. I started kind of going into, in a way, an isolation about a couple of years ago, really. Well, maybe more than that. It was more like 2.5 years ago, I guess. 2018. I was just like feeling like I was taking on too much outward advice and I needed to find my own advice, right? And when we start going internal, and I think this is a great segue into their topic, is because when we start going internal, not only do we find more clarity in what we do want, but we also tend to find more clarity in what stops us from getting what we want. And those are our inner demons or inner traumas. So you have a really cool tool that you showed me. Can you share with everyone what you shared with me on this whole like identifying your traumas thing?
Definitely. And so for me, it was also a handful of years ago. And talking about awareness, learning how I react to certain situations. And I think you hit the nail on the head. What stops you from accomplishing, or what I found myself in this repetitive cycle over and over. And I would get to the certain level of either success in work or life or relationships. And then boom, something would happen and I would lose it all. So I would start all over, get back to the exact same point, whether it was the income I was making, whether it was like the depth of my relationships that I was having. And then it would just self-sabotage, have to start all over. And so one of my coaches gave me this tool. And so it's called the PTSI from Patrick Carnes. And the theory behind it, and again, we are not psychologists. We are not diagnosing anything, but this is, a lot of people take personality tests in their, what's the Myers-Briggs?
Yeah, what is it? There's Myers-Briggs. There's like, what's your car? What's your color?
Yeah, the colors one is another huge one. And they're really good kind of surface level tools to learn about other people and how to respond. But that deeper core is that we're all operating, it's something like 70% of what we do, if not higher, is out of habit. So it's
70%,
if not higher.
That makes me worrisome now. I did not know that number.
Yeah, it's something crazy high. It's all out of our subconscious instead of actual conscious thought.
Right. That makes sense. That does make sense. Because you're kind of, if you really think about it, and before we get into your tool, something that I discussed with my sister, and you and I've had this conversation before. My sister was always go, go, go with her job. She was going there, then she'd go to kickboxing, and then she'd maybe go to the grocery store and go back home. By then it was like 11 p.m. So it was always there's always the next thing. There never was really time to sit and work out your crap.
Yeah.
So when 2020 hit, she had a lot of time to sit down and work out her crap. She had all day for like a couple months, really. And that was really the time where you really get self-reflective and really start to learn those things. And I think that's kind of what we're doing every day with those habits, is that we're just kind of working on autopilot, and we're not really sitting in and being present with ourselves and getting like that awareness that you're kind of hinting to. So I just kind of wanted to point that out, because a lot of people, they don't realize they're on autopilot.
Totally. And so much of our life is geared towards that autopilot reaction. So when we understand how, like, what we're doing in that autopilot state, when we have words to define it, we can then consciously correct ourselves once we understand maybe we're not operating in the best way possible. So the tool I had and is called the post-traumatic stress index. So all of us are traumatized to a certain extent, is the theory of it. So there's what's called a big T trauma, which is something like significant, whether it's like the divorce of parents when you're young, or a car accident, or physical violence. So those are big T, but little t traumas are things like a nagging parent, or a neglectful parent, or never being, not getting praised, or just an unstable household where it wasn't anything significant, but it was consistent. And so those little t traumas can add up and actually be more impactful to our future adult life than a big T trauma.
Well, it's kind of like that habit creating, right? Consistency creates habits.
Exactly.
Right.
And so when we're young, we develop these habits to protect ourselves and keep ourselves safe. And as we get older, we tend to keep the same habits, which don't protect us, and they actually sabotage our lives. So when we understand how we're reacting to a stressful situation with this PTSI, we can then see in the moment, or maybe shortly after the moment happens, and say, okay, I wasn't operating out of my best self.
Okay.
Kind of makes sense.
Yeah. No, that totally makes sense.
So this is the one tool that's kind of, I think, really helped me understand why I was where I was, and why I was self-sabotaging at every stage when I got to a certain level of success.
Right.
So the categories, and go look it up. We'll put it on our show notes whenever we get our show notes situation set up.
We haven't gotten that far, guys. But we will.
We will soon, hopefully before you see this.
So good, we're all figuring this out. Great. So yeah, tell us the categories.
So it's basically being trauma reactive, being trauma repetitive, having trauma bonds, having trauma shame, trauma pleasure, trauma blocking, trauma splitting, or trauma abstaining. And
interesting.
Again,
that's 8. Is that 8?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And my mentor, actually, he doesn't like, because trauma is such a heavy word, and so a lot of people have really negative connotations to that. He likes the term variables, and essentially it's anytime, his definition is anytime through childhood that you had less than nurturing behavior created a little t variable, a little t trauma.
A little I just got an interesting image in my head, like just a little t. Not a big T, just a little T.
Just a little T.
You know,
just kind of following you around.
Hanging out. Yeah. Okay.
It's like
very invasive little T, sneaks around. Don't notice it.
It's got like the stick figure hands and like the mouth.
Exactly.
From like Sesame Street.
We might have to create a graphic for this. Gotcha. So this test is kind of cool because when I took it, when you sent it to me, it was like 100 questions. And I think that's appropriate because some of these like personality tests, they're like 10 questions and it's like, I know exactly who you are. And it's like, no, humans are very dynamic, especially when it comes to like traumas. So when I took it, it took me, I mean, it didn't take me terribly long. It took me maybe 15 minutes because the questions were pretty direct. But
and it's also, they're really uncomfortable questions. I always warn everyone, I'm like, it's going to be like the least comfortable test you've ever taken.
Yeah, I guess.
But for me anyway. But go ahead, tell me more about it.
Well, I liked it because it asked kind of out of the box questions and got me really thinking, oh, do I do that? Really kind of, giving me that awareness of just even asking myself, do I do that? Because, kind of foreshadowing, but come to find out, I'm a trauma blocker. That's one of my big ones. And one of my bigger T's, I guess, is a little bit bigger than a small T. And it's like a medium T, which means that I really block my traumas. I don't really address them. I just kind of like ignore them and let them sit there forever.
Put them in that little box deep down.
Yeah, the ostrich, as I say. I put my head in the sand and it's like, what trauma? I don't have trauma. Yeah. Or I don't identify that it's associated with my trauma, right? Like it's very difficult for me to see that. But I end up
real quick, let's call it stress. Because that's really what happens now that we're adults and it's not, we're out of like that childhood mind. It's really how we react to stress.
Most of us is out of that childhood mind.
Some of us.
I've met some very large children. Some very old looking children. Yeah.
But it's really about like, so, and I'm a blocker as well. So anytime something stressful comes up, I'm just like, it'll be fine. That really wasn't that impactful.
Right, because you have a story where you actually were taking this test in like a conference or something and they were addressing someone with the blocker trauma.
Yeah, and so I'm trying to think of exactly how to explain it because again, it takes me a lot to really believe in a lot of these different things. And like in a future thing, maybe we'll talk about it in a little bit, but I didn't even believe that ADHD existed. So, and a lot of this I take really with a grain of salt until I got deep into this test and we had this full weekend immersion. Someone else we were going through we had to build this thing with our life stories and show how our life story relates to how we react to stress now as adults. And his was so blatantly obvious to the rest of us in the group. Like, it was like, well, when I was a kid, this happened. When I was an adolescent, this happened. And this is how.
Just like no emotion to it. It's just a fact. Like.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And which is how I explain things a lot too. Right.
Right.
And he was like, well, no, I've dealt with it and I understand it. This isn't an issue. It's like, well, it is an issue.
I totally have said that in my life. That's exact words too.
Yeah. It's like, I've dealt with it. I get it. And it's like, well, you've told us the pattern that's happening right now, which is why you're at the sticking point, which is why you're at this conference. This is the issue. And he's like, no, that's not the issue.
It's a complete deniability.
And and he was he so couldn't see it. And I said the same thing. I was like, no, I understand that these are significant events in my life, but I've dealt with it. They're like, I don't think you have. And like seeing him say the same thing where it was so obvious was like a punch in my face. Like, how can I not see that I'm blocking? Right. And it's the hardest thing. Because it's blocked, right?
Yeah.
Where the other one,
everyone has like, I don't think it like really matters which trauma you have, right? But if it's like such a strong, I guess you could say in the hierarchy of your traumas, like yours with the blocking and me with blocking as well, it's really high up there on ours. And so if it's so high up there, it's so strong that it's such a challenge for someone else. It could be pleasure, it could be, splitting, it could be whatever it is. And it feels like it's so difficult for that individual, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like, if anyone were to take this test and they got something different, it could be just as challenging for you as say blocking is for like David, And
that's why it's good. Always take this, like, have a professional, help out with this kind of
have a professional tell you, no, you're blocking, as David just did, like before we were chatting here. He's like, no, you're blocking, and I'm like, no, no. I'm not blocking at all.
I'm not doing that. Or
which is like
someone
really
you trust.
hard. Like, but that's also a good question. You know, it's also like, are you a blocker? Are you an abstinence? You know, whatever it may be, because I know abstinence is on the higher, like top 3 of mine. And so with that one, it's like, am I being abstinence or am I just who I am? You know, and that's a really good question to ask yourself. Because like for me, I know lots of people who wish to go and travel in a very luxurious way. For me, give me a backpack. I will walk my way across China, you know, because that to me is an adventure and exciting in itself. And so is it abstinence or is it just personal choice, right? And so it's just kind of, you know, really understanding yourself. And that's back to that key word, awareness, right? So how does one take this test, see their top 2, let's say, and they're just like, okay, I got these awesome traumas that I now am aware this questionnaire has told me I have. What's kind of the next step that people can take to really dive deeper into them, so it's no longer taking these obstacles in their journey?
So, and that's a really good question. And again, I'm not a professional, I'm not an expert. But
you went to a conference, David. You're the smartest person on this right now. You have read a chapter ahead of everyone else, at least me, on this topic.
I think the most comforting thing that I ever saw was that even the people who study this the most, the people who are the best at understanding how this works, and they take all the time to dive into this, they're still again, it's 70% or higher or 80% of their life, they're not operating from a functional adult standpoint. They're still in their traumas, right? Or in their reacting to their stress.
And I think it's kind of an approach issue, though, at the same time, because a lot of people, they approach it that I don't want this to be in my life anymore. And so it's one of those things like get rid of it kind of attitude versus loving it and yourself for having it, right?
Yeah. And so it's not
2 totally different approaches. One is like get rid of it. The other is like embracing it. In a weird way.
No, you're totally right, because we'll never be able to get rid of it. It's so deeply ingrained in us that like no one ever gets rid of their, you know, reaction to stress. What it is being aware, like, okay, I am reacting, and I'm not coming from like a intentional standpoint. I'm coming from a reactive standpoint.
Right.
And the more we're aware that, hey, I am in a reactive state right now, let me step back, the faster we can kind of get out of that reactive state. But it's not something to ever get rid of. Right.
So when it comes to like trauma blocking, like let's put this in an example of like, you know, what's happened in your life or even my life, whichever. But like with you trauma blocking, how has that become a hurdle in you being a business owner?
And again, each one of these has pluses and minuses, right? So there's positive and negative, shadow and light side. So blocking means I would often get into relationships with other, or not contracts, but I would do business with people I probably shouldn't be doing business with. I would just kind of look past and say, hey, I know that X, Y, and Z was bad before. I'm just going to ignore that though. And this time it's going to be better.
We're going to block other people's issues.
Just
grow with it. Yeah.
Yeah. And then again, I just get burned. So I got burned a lot, right? Before I realized like, okay, I'm not paying attention to these significant red flags. It happened in relationships too, right? I would let really bad things happen for longer than it should happen just because I was blocking it. And I was saying, okay, it's not that impactful in my life. I can deal with anything. It's totally okay. Go ahead.
Because what I'm hearing as well is that there's like this, and I can totally relate to this, and I'm sure many others can who are listening, is that there's pain, potential pain approaching, right? And so we create this boundary between that pain from even affecting us, but we also don't let it go away. right? We let it kind of stick around, but as long as we're not feeling the pain, it's
Exactly.
okay
Because we're
until it
not
gets
feeling
too
it.
much. Right.
Yeah.
But then it like boils over and now you're forced to feel the pain and forced to make a decision that you put yourself into. Damn it. But, you know, it's like, but you put yourself into, and now you must make a decision, and now the pain is even greater. Like,
Exactly.
I think this awareness thing is key in the sense of it's almost like preventive measures, and a lot of life is about prevention. You know, it's a lot about preventing yourself from getting into a sticky situation where you could get beat up or mugged or, you know, killed, right? And then there's prevention of like with your health, like you should eat certain ways and so you don't have to take medications, and your quality of life. There's the same thing with your traumas too. So it's like really being aware of it and taking early preventative measures so that you don't get stuck into that point where you're like get overloaded, and then all of a sudden you have to, like, you're so forced to face it. Like I know for me, I was in so much blockage with finances that it got me into bankruptcy. Like I was an ostrich. I had my head in the sand. I wouldn't even look at my bank account. I wouldn't even look at any of that stuff. I was just an ostrich, and it got me to the point to where I had to face that I had a ridiculous amount of credit card debt, and my bank account kept bouncing, and like I had to file bankruptcy. But I was a business owner. I couldn't file bankruptcy. Like that would mean I was a failure, right?
Yeah, not publicly, right?
Oh my God,
then again,
I can't do that.
You go with that blocking, and you're like, I'm just going to hide this from everyone. No one's going to know.
I actually did the opposite. So when I filed for bankruptcy, I was actually very open to it. I didn't go on Facebook and say I'm filing bankruptcy, you know, but what I wasn't hiding it when I was talking to people. I finally started really addressing the fact, like it boiled over to the point, like I wasn't in pain about the bankruptcy actually, which is really weird. A lot of people feel like the worst failure in their entire lives when they go through bankruptcy. I didn't feel like the worst failure because when I went into the questions of, do I need to file for bankruptcy? I went to somebody where I was like totally neutral. I was like, I don't even know them, right? And so I was just like, hey, ask the questions of bankruptcy. What does this look like in the end for me? Specifically, it's not the answer for everyone, but for me, I chose for that to be my answer. And I went with it. I went into it with such peace because I honestly, personally feel like I came into that decision early instead of waiting until the last second to say, okay, I need to file bankruptcy, right? So for me, filing bankruptcy actually went in a little bit earlier than most people. That's at least what I was told. And so I was very at peace with the decision. Like it didn't feel great. Like I wasn't like, you know, oh yay, I'm filing for bankruptcy, you know. It was also one of those like, I don't feel ashamed of it. And I can talk about it at the same time because I took preventative measures. So even when you're failing,
or is it because you were
preventative measures?
Is it because you were blocking the emotions?
No, actually I wasn't, because I was taking good steps to get very healthy with money. And that's another podcast, is your relationship with money and your traumas around money, right?
Yeah.
But I really went into it with a lot of peace because I had support. I had people around me that loved me, and I knew I was moving into a direction that was going to be better for me. And that was so true. Like it was a gut instinct. I was actually listening to my instinct than listening to my traumas, if that makes sense.
Okay. I like it. So what other questions?
So what was your secondary trauma? I forget.
So trauma blocking is one, and trauma pleasure. So trauma seeking. So
so you're seeking trauma?
Seeking intensity. Yeah. And a lot of these
seeking stress. Is that what I'm hearing? Seeking stress?
Yeah. It says finding pleasure in the presence of danger, violence, risk, or shame.
So you want to get shot at and mugged.
Ideally not shot. That's one of my high things I don't want to do.
You don't like the preventative measures. That's what I just heard.
So yeah. So what'll happen is often I will subconsciously seek out high stress, high risk situations, which again has its plus and the minus, where especially mixed with blocking means I'm not feeling that pain. And because I'm not feeling it, I'm actually finding situations to feel, right? And this actually goes into ADHD as well.
Oh, interesting.
I'll probably choose partners that are more risky. When I'm gambling or investing, I definitely take higher risk actions. which
Right.
gives me more reward sometimes, but also more failure.
Mhm.
And then the negative side of the blocking side is I'm not learning from those failures, even though
Right.
I'm seeking the higher intensity of the situation, whatever it is. But being aware of it, so I'm saying, okay, is this a good choice or is it trauma seeking, right? Am I just
Mhm.
seeking out intensity? And then having those words and being able to ask myself that question lets me see, okay, I do have a higher risk tolerance than most people, right? Which is, I think it's
Right.
not a bad thing at all. I think it's a good
No.
entrepreneur skill.
Yeah. It can be.
Can be. But by understanding that this is a reaction of mine to seek out something intense, it's like, am I just bored and I'm trying to like bring something
Yeah.
into my life, or am I like do I really think this is a good decision?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Interesting. So that's another good question that I think even I would ask myself and those who are listening is that, are you trying to just feel human, feel something, right?
yeah.
Feel alive, I guess is that what a lot of people say. I just want to feel alive,
Just want to
right?
feel something. Yeah.
So they go sky. So you just need to go on a roller coaster every week. Like I gotta get in my adrenaline,
Yeah.
and so I think that's a really good question, because I know for me, I've had situations where I would, something would escalate or something would get worse sometimes, or even better, and I would just thrive off of that emotion. I felt very alive, even though I may not have necessarily enjoyed it, but I felt it, and I was feeling definitely more alive than I had prior. I wasn't bored, right? I wasn't neutral. And I think we have to also identify that as humans, because we all are human, newsflash, that
newsflash.
we literally are constantly feeling something. Okay. We are never necessarily in a neutral state. Meditation and presence can help you do more of that, and just but that's really just being aware of where your emotions and your feelings are.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of coming back to that whole present state of, okay, instead of living in a fearful state or living in a seeking state or living in a blocking, numb state, am I actually paying attention to how I'm feeling in this moment? Right.
Exactly.
And that's where I feel, again, for me, that gut instinct word, that's my presence. That's kind of how I'm really starting to identify. And because I never would really do that. I was always super logical, or I would just be like, oh, I should marry this guy because on paper he sounds right? Mom would approve, or whatever that would be. And so that was a good idea, but gut instinct told me to run away. And honestly, in retrospect, I should have. But here we are, and I've learned that lesson for a reason, right? And so it's really all about paying attention to what you were actually feeling, because even though you say you're numb, you're actually not.
Yeah.
You just like to think you are. And so it's like, stop that. But I feel like also numbness is one of the hardest things to really overcome too.
It is.
Because it's such a difficult barrier to blast through, because it means you actually have to feel something, and you're so terrified of feeling pain that you just decide to not even feel pleasure too.
Yeah. And
except for you. You're kind of diabolical, actually. You're like, oh, no, I'm not going to feel anything, but I want to feel a lot at the same time.
Yeah. So it's all or none for me, right?
And is that ADHD, like bipolarity, I guess you could say?
Well, so that leads into an interesting segue, because with the PTSI, this is how we're operating from our past in a subconscious state. Right. And the other big thing I learned this year is that I actually do have ADHD. And that's how I actually operate from in the state of presence. This is how I've kind of like been. So the PTSI is how I react. And then ADHD is a brain pattern of how I act. So where you
have dopamine, right?
The theory in ADHD is low dopamine arousal theory, is that the ADHD brain produces less dopamine than a normal brain. So we're actually seeking dopamine hits. So whether it's And that comes from either accomplishing something, video games, TV. That's why TikTok is such a thing for me, because it's 15 seconds of really interesting stuff.
Okay. Yeah.
And then there's all kinds of other terms like hyper focus, where I can really dive into a project for hours upon hours without sleeping and just really crank out and get it done. And then other stuff just doesn't matter to me. So there's how I operate on an everyday standpoint is really neat to see now that I'm learning the specifics of that ADHD mind.
Mm-hmm.
And for kind of, as you were mentioning, getting really present with, are you being too logical? Are you really feeling that emotion, or are you responding to those emotions that you're feeling? So the mix of understanding how you react from your past to how you operate on your daily level, like on your everyday interaction, is the most powerful combination of things that can make a really, really productive person. Was that rambly, or did that make sense?
No, it was both, really. It was rambly, but also had some truth bombs, which I really liked.
Okay.
So the one I liked is kind of this polarity effect, right? That not only does the ADHD brain with your blocking have, right? But I feel like everybody kind of has that piece, right? But it's also this polarity of I want to be logical, but I need to also listen to gut instinct, right? And so it's really having that alignment, as people like to say, with kind of like a balance between the two, if that makes sense. Because your gut instinct may be like, yeah, buying a $3 million house would be a great investment. And your brain is like, you have $3 in your bank account. What the fuck do you think you're doing? You know what I like? Yeah. So there has to be an alignment between the two of them. And that's where I really feel presence comes in. Absolutely. Is that it really connects kind of like that in woo-woo world. They'll say that kind of chakra alignment, right? You have the divine, you have your logical, basically, you have your heart, and you have your foundation. And so all of that's really in alignment that helps you move forward in a very kind of like a divine light way. But if we really start being more present and identifying, this is coming from fear, this is my gut instinct, logic tells me this can happen, but maybe it can happen differently, you know? So that's also another thing. When it comes to gut instinct, it's like, I'm going to buy a sailboat and I'm going to live on that sailboat and sail around the world, right? And my logic comes in and like, and that's not happening today. So how's that happening, right? And so I think it's definitely one of these, we have to really guide ourselves by being in alignment with those two aspects. So that polarity pull, tug and pull is really important, but a lot of people don't like that tug and pull feeling. They want to commit to one thing. Is it logic or is it instinct? And it's like, it's actually a combination of the two. So there's no real like definition of this because everyone's definition is different. Yeah. But I feel like it's definitely sitting back and asking logic and asking your instinct. Yeah. What's the best way to move forward? What feels correct? Instead of kind of like what logically makes sense on paper. And I know a lot of people, especially in my family, there are a lot of engineers and all that. They're really into that space. Yeah. And so that's probably family dynamics really pulled me into that space. But I've come to learn that I'm very much of a gut instinct person as well. And that's something I've ignored for now decades. And so I've been really playing with that, especially in the last 2 years. And nothing but amazing things have happened now that I've been tuning more and more into it. Because instinct also comes with receiving. Logic comes with a lot with giving. And so it's this interesting tug and pull again that we're playing with, that I give to receive. And I receive so that I can give more, right? So there's always these cycles. And I think we need to really start to understand that we're dynamic human beings. And that we are. Treat ourselves as such.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So where can people find this PTSI test?
So I am on traumatest.com is where you can
nice.
find it.
Easy. Nice. Traumatest.com. Go check it out. Try
or
as a guide.
We'll upload the PDF onto wherever it is we put PDFs.
Nice. Yeah, when we figure that out too.
Yeah.
We are definitely on this journey of finding out how the fuck we're doing things.
So to recap though, what do you think the top 3 things are that someone can do to kind of get in touch with either their traumas or their operating system that they use?
Well, in every step of growth, it's really just being willing to ask those questions. Mm-hmm. Do I actually have trauma blocking, like yourself, right? Do I actually have trauma blocking? And being okay with maybe it's a yes, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe you do, right? And so taking that test, for example, if you take that test, just being open to what answers pop up and really get reflective on them. Okay. And that comes with, again, kind of going into that awareness piece would be kind of like, I guess, that second step, whatever. People like steps. So blah, blah, blah. There's always a blueprint in a step process, and I've done all those.
Yeah. Anyway. We need them. It's important.
So step number one. Be open to asking yourself the deep questions and being okay with the answer of yes and or no. Okay. Second would be the awareness piece, really getting present and literally feeling into it. And if it makes you cry, if it makes you angry, if it makes you happy, accept all of it. That's you are literally accepting. So really the message here is lean in to yourself with love here with your traumas rather than trying to get rid of your traumas. This is about loving yourself for who you are, the journey you have, and the journey to come, rather than pushing your past and yourself away from yourself, if that made sense. Mm-hmm. What about you, David? Do you have steps or a blueprint or a formula for us?
So there was a joke, I forget who said it, but it's like, us entrepreneurs, we really like to put things in boxes, in squares. So we would just draw like an X on the chalkboard and be like, so these are the 4 things, the 4 quadrants. In the 3 steps.
I noticed in business, we're always doing like these hunting things, like these very primitive deals. Like we're hunting for leads, we're sourcing leads, we're gathering. I'm like, what's with this hunter-gatherer like analogy that we keep doing? It's like, I have them in my scope. I have them in my funnel. It's like, that's all very like, yeah, it's interesting. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, that's funny. So number 1 is, whether it's this test, whether it's another one, the more internal reflective tools I think that we have, the more we can understand how we operate. And the key, I think you said, is we're not trying to change it. We're just trying to understand it. Now, that being said, it's really easy to get lost in all of these tools and to really define ourselves by what these tools contain. Mm-hmm. And I think so step number 1 is find some tool that you like if you haven't found one already. If you've already found one, go back into it and look at it. But step number 2 is nothing set in stone, right? We're definitely malleable people. We can change things. So being open to being able to build the version of yourself that you want to build. And what really comes through just awareness of the present moment. So step number 1.
Curiosity, I think, is a key word in that, what you just mentioned. Curiosity of yourself.
So just being curious about not being stuck in having whatever that tool defines you as. Don't be stuck and rigid in, hey, this is who I am. This is what I have. And this is why I act this way. So
that's trauma bonding. That's like, I love my traumas so much. I am going to be acting this way forever.
Yeah.
Because there's plenty of people that I know that like say that. They're like, I got father issues, mother issues, or whatever issues, right? And then they're like, and 10 years later, they still have those issues and they have not changed one bit, right? That's a choice to continue to be part of that trauma and not actually love yourself with that trauma, right? And move on.
Yeah.
And anyway, just thought I'd point that out there. It's like, totally you can definitely be in love with your trauma, not necessarily yourself.
Yes, exactly. And so it's not a definition. It doesn't define you forever. It just is a thing. And we can move past that. And I think the one we mentioned kind of before is that everything we've done in our lives is our own fault, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I hate that just as much as everyone who's listening. They're like, no, I'm not. It's not my fault. And it's like, yes and no, right?
Yeah.
Yes and no.
no matter what it is. So being able to take that responsibility and say, hey, my success was my fault and my failures were my fault. And just take ownership of that. I think that can really propel us to that next level. At least that was the thing that propelled me. Once I learned that I was failing at the same point when I hit the same level of success every time, and it was my fault because of how I was responding to certain situations. So once I took on that responsibility, then I started getting more coaching. I started investing into figuring these things out and getting good advice. And it's changed my life dramatically.
Right. In what way? Tell us, what's the light at the end of the tunnel, David?
What's the light at the end of the tunnel? Just understanding.
Shine on us a little bit.
So I'm no longer stuck working for other people, which has been the worst thing. I'm definitely, the relationships I get into are much less toxic. So there's still pluses and minuses, but there's a much healthier trade between the relationships that I've been in.
Right. Relationships should be getting better, not worse, right?
Yeah. Everyone has gotten better and we've learned. And I think for the most part, anyway, that'll be for another episode.
That's on our next episode on relationships.
On the next one,
we'll dive into what did he mean? Favorite topic. That's total sarcasm. In case you can't tell if you're listening or watching this, like David's over there, like I don't want to talk about this, but I do at the same time because it's that trauma blocking, right?
Yeah, totally.
For me, when it comes to relationships, I think you and I are on the same page. We're like, we do not want to talk about it, but the podcast is making us talk about it, which is good for us. We get that.
Yeah, one of the reasons we're doing it, right?
Yeah. Like we're doing it because we know we want to talk about it, but at the same time, we really don't because we're trauma blockers. So, it's like, God damn it. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So maybe that's the message for everyone. Force yourself to be in a podcast to talk about the shit you don't want to talk about.
Yeah. And when there's something that you don't want to do, find a way to step into a way to force yourself to do it because there's a reason, right?
Yeah, right.
There's a reason I hate talking about relationships. But I need to.
There was a reason why I hated talking about money, because of the bankruptcy and the failures and sales and stuff like that. And then I started doing better and I started coaching people with money. And I feel like I have a hell of a lot better relationship with money because I stepped into the fear of it. Right?
Yeah. And even
again, it's that loving yourself.
Before just a few years ago, I couldn't talk in public. Like I couldn't be at the front of the stage. I barely wanted to present in front of any group. I was so fearful of presenting myself in any way to anyone. I just couldn't do it. And so I forced myself into situations where I was running a group and then I had to run one of the seminars because my speaker wasn't there and I had already booked it. And I was like, the worst thing, but I did it. And now I'm on a podcast and talking to people. So it's like,
look at you on video.
Which is why I'm so rambly because I don't know how to, present my thoughts in a public setting.
I am really interested and I think it's really good for people to take, and I think we're getting a little on tangents here, but it's good stuff. Yeah. So here's a great example. So like today you leaned into the fears of speaking and here you are on a podcast, you're on video, you're like rambly, you say a year from now, even maybe 3 months from now, I would love to compare how you are on video and in the podcast than you were just even 3 months ago. And just see how crazy different you will be. Because I know other people, I used to be in Toastmasters, which if you don't know what that is basically a group of people that get together and do types of public speaking. And it's about confidence and leadership, but a lot of people tend to go in there to be public speakers as well. Well, there was this one girl, a story I love so much, I hadn't actually met her, but a story of a gal who went into Toastmasters and just delivering her first speech, which is just 4 minutes, which can seem like forever, but it was a 4-minute speech and she couldn't get through any 30 seconds without puking. Like she just kept running for the trash can and throwing up. Jeez. And
I relate
that
to
was
that.
the whole, you're right. So maybe a lot of people on here are like, yeah, because public speaking is actually, excuse me, a more intense fear than actually death.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
you know, if you can really dive into that like she did, like full on, she's puking in front of people, like, come on, like how humiliating can that be? And then like 3 months later, or maybe it was 6 months later, it was like she was a rock star on stage. Like she just felt like she was at home. Yeah, so it really just depends on how fast or how deep you dive into it. And I think it just really means how much commitment you have to really diving into your traumas.
And that's
really going to overcoming.
Relating it back to why we're doing this podcast, diving into that thing that you're scared of, knowing that you're not going to know what you're doing, and it's okay. Like, you don't know what the fuck you're doing. I don't know what I'm doing trying to do a podcast, but we're doing it. I didn't know what I was doing trying to run an organization of 1,000 people about entrepreneurship. I just started it because I wanted some help running a small business, and I wanted to bring some people to me, you know, and then it turned into something much bigger. It's cool not knowing what you're doing and being okay with that.
Absolutely. I think it's one of those, like, being okay with it because you're taking action anyway. And it's really all about taking action, being aware of said action, learning from action, and then doing another action because of that.
Absolutely.
It's a different, healthier cycle.
As long as it's a healthy action, right?
If it's a healthy cycle, we're okay with it. You know, if it's like a trap cycle, not so great.
Yeah. Cool. Anything else you want to throw into this?
Cool. Awkward. Don't know how to end the podcast episode. Yeah, I think everyone felt that.
I'm obviously going to edit it out.
One tip for everyone out there who's ever done public speaking or anything like that: if something was awkward, weird, or whatever, call it out so that everybody can just like relax and be like, oh, thank God, because I felt that too. Call out the elephant in the room. Well, thanks for listening to our second episode of I Don't Know What the Fuck I'm Doing podcast.
Woo, 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 episode 2.
Yay! We will be doing episode 3 literally 5 minutes from now, but you won't listen to it until like a few days later. And we are going to be discussing relationships, our most feared topic.
Woo!
So yay.
Are we going to get some super juicy details about us in the next episode?
Hooray. So we will be talking about that. I'm blocking you right now. So we'll be talking about that in a few days' time when you see our next episode of I Don't Know What the Fuck I'm Doing.
All right. And thanks, everyone, for tuning in. I think you guys are wonderful, and we'll see you soon.
Toodles.